Welcome back. The case against Marxism is about to be closed, and what we have now is the final, damning evidence. In our last Explain It, we uncovered its core mission, to dissolve nations, to erase borders. But the question is, how could an idea so powerful be built on such a fundamental lie? Well, we're going deep into the code now to expose the fatal flaw that was always designed to bring the whole project crashing down.
Our investigation is going to follow the evidence in 4 parts. First, we'll expose the philosophical lie right at its heart. Then, we'll see how that lie played out in the real world, and how it caused every so-called communist state to fail the test of history. And that failure, that reveals the real system they all ended up converging on. And finally, the nationalist alternative they were all eventually forced to embrace.
Okay, this right here is the core of the deception. The source we're examining, which builds on the work of philosophers like Giovanni Gentile, it argues that Marx wasn't some brilliant materialist at all. No, he was a confused idealist who hid his moral crusade behind the mask of objective science.
This is the central question, right? And the answer exposes the entire project as a fraud. Was Marx a scientist, just observing the inevitable laws of history? Or was he a prophet, trying to will a new world into existence through sheer belief? And there it is, the contradiction, the fatal flaw in the code. I mean, think about it for a second. If history is truly determined by these grand material forces, if capitalism is absolutely doomed to collapse, then why on earth do you need revolutionaries? They should just be passive observers, right? Just sitting back and waiting for the future to arrive. But they're not. They are agitators, demanding blood and fire. You see? The system completely contradicts itself.
This quote reveals what Marx's materialism really was. According to our source, it was never a scientific discovery. It was a cover story. It was a supposedly solid scientific justification for what was, at its very core, a moral crusade disguised as hard science.
And Lenin himself just admits it, right here. This was never about objective truth or some kind of historical law. It was a moral crusade. He's basically saying, our morality is whatever helps our side win. That's not science. That is a belief system, a revolutionary faith that demands sacrifice on the altar of class warfare.
Now, this philosophical flaw, it's not just a theory. It's like a time bomb that explains the historical wreckage of the 20th century. It is the reason every single state that called itself communist failed on its own terms.
You see, the evidence of bankruptcy is found by judging Marxism by its own rules. To achieve what they called true socialism, Marx and his followers set very clear goals. First, the complete abolition of all social classes. Second, the state itself has to become obsolete and just wither away. And third, all commodity production, we're talking money, value, profits, it all had to stop. Well, they failed, on all counts.
Lenin himself sets the first benchmark. He's crystal clear about it. As long as workers and peasants exist as distinct groups, you have classes. And as long as you have classes, you do not have socialism. It's really that simple. The system fails its own first test.
And here, in the very same breath, Lenin admits to total failure. He says, classes still remain. So the dictatorship became permanent because the classes never, ever disappeared. The USSR never even abolished wage labor. In fact, it relied on a piece rate system, a method that Marx himself called one of the most bourgeois and capitalist forms of wages. The same thing happened in China, whose own flag literally represents the national bourgeoisie as a core part of its revolutionary coalition. It's a direct violation of Marxist doctrine.
So, the verdict is in. Judged by their own sacred texts, every single one of these regimes failed. They never reached the promised land. They weren't socialist, they weren't communist, they were something else entirely.
And this leads us to the final, shocking revelation. If these historical experiments weren't Marxist, then what were they? The answer reveals a convergence that's almost unbelievable. The source gives it a name, state capitalism. This is a hybrid system, you see, where the state seizes total control of the economy, but is then forced to use the tools of its sworn enemy, capitalism, just to survive. Lenin himself was the first one to pivot. He adopted his new economic policy and had to reintroduce private enterprise out of sheer desperation. Now listen to this. In a stunning admission, the fascist leader Mussolini confirms it. He saw absolutely no difference. State capitalism, state socialism, he says the outcome is identical, total state control, total bureaucratization. The supposed arch-enemies, the fascists and the communists, they were building the exact same machine from different blueprints. This is the Great Convergence.
The source argues that every single time pure Marxism was tried, its flawed theories just collapsed under the weight of reality. And in the rubble, every leader from Lenin to Mao was forced to build the only model that actually worked for a developmental dictatorship, state capitalism.
So now we arrive at the final piece of the puzzle. With Marxism totally exposed as a failure, what rose up from its ashes? What was the real alternative that these dictatorships embraced?
They didn't eliminate struggle. They just redefined the enemy. The source argues that ideologies like fascism took Marx's engine of history, class warfare, and simply turned the cannons outwards. The enemy was no longer the capitalist down the street. The enemy was the rival nation across the border.
And this was the masterstroke. The nation itself became the new proletariat. The internal division of class was replaced by the external unity of a national struggle. They weaponized the language of socialism for the goals of nationalism.
And this quote says it all, doesn't it? The fusion was complete. Socialism was no longer a tool to destroy the nation, it became the fuel for the nation, uniting it for a singular purpose, a singular struggle.
And this brings our entire investigation to its powerful close. In the real world, the utopian dreams of Marxism were just no match for the ruthless pragmatism of the developmental dictatorship, the state capitalist model, a corporatist system unifying all sectors under the state. It always won. This was the so-called third path.
So the source leaves us with a truly chilling conclusion. The extreme ideologies of the 20th century, both Marxism and liberal capitalism, were ultimately rejected by those who seized power. And in their place rose a brutally effective hybrid, a model that combined the economic machinery of socialism with the unifying power of nationalism. The real lesson here isn't about left versus right. It's about the raw, uncompromising logic of absolute power.